There's a photograph of my father somewhere in a box I've never opened. He's standing in front of a fireplace, civilian clothes, laughing at something outside the frame. He looks like someone who still knew how to be surprised by things. I found that photograph 2 days before I shipped out for the first time, and I remember thinking, I don't know this man. Not because he was a stranger, because I was 22 and I had never once seen him laugh like that in my actual life. Not that way, not that open. By the time I was old enough to notice him, he had already become something else, something sealed. I thought I understood why back then. I was wrong. The first time I stood post outside the palace, it was November. Not the cinematic November people picture when they think of London. Not the gray golden mist of period films. Not Turner light over the Thames. It was wet. The kind of wet that makes no noise, no drama, just settles into your collar and works down your spine by increments until your whole back is cold and you don't know when it started. 4:40 in the morning. The tourists wouldn't come for hours. I stood there in the dark, and I thought, nobody sees this part. They see the bearskin, the scarlet tunic, the fixed jaw. They photograph the theater of it. They don't photograph November at 4:40. They don't photograph the thing happening behind the eyes of the man inside the costume. I was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I am not building towards some collapse, some crisis. That would be a tidier story. This is not a tidy story. This is a story about how a man can be present in every external sense, standing, breathing, performing his duty with absolute precision, and still be somewhere else entirely. How that becomes, over time, not an escape, but a technique. A muscle you develop the way you develop all the others. Absence is craft. And how by the time you notice what you've lost to that muscle, you've been practicing it so long you can't remember which parts of yourself you put down and which parts just dissolved under the discipline of holding still. Set up my name is Daniel Adeyemi, Sergeant, King's Guard, stationed at St. James's Palace. Though for the purposes of this telling, I was for 3 consecutive years stationed at the Wellington Barracks, which puts you a short march from Buckingham Palace, and well inside that world, that particular ecosystem of ceremony and silence and things that go on whether you're ready or not. I grew up in Coventry. My mother was Yoruba, second generation, a practical woman who expressed love through logistics. She would move heaven and scheduling to ensure you had what you needed before you knew you needed it. My father was from Wolverhampton, quiet in the specific way that men of his generation were taught to be quiet, which is to say not peacefully, but voluntarily, the way you'd choose a smaller portion because asking for more felt like a declaration. He'd served Royal Marines, 14 years. He never talked about it in narrative, never said there was this one time, but it shaped the grammar of everything he did. The way he set a table, the way he slept, the way he stood at the edge of photographs, positioned slightly behind whoever he was standing with, as though he'd trained himself out of taking up space. I watched him my whole childhood and thought, I understand. Discipline, sacrifice. It is what the job requires, and he gave it, and he has no regrets. I joined because I wanted that. Not the not talking, the straightness of it, the clarity. Civilian life felt murky to me. Jobs where success was a feeling, relationships where the terms were never stated, emotions moving through rooms like weather that no one would acknowledge or name. The military had rules, had standards, had a shape. I wanted the shape. I arrived at Wellington Barracks in February, 23 years old, 2 years of training behind me, carrying nothing I thought mattered about my old life. I had been briefed on the ceremony, the drill, the expectations. I had been briefed on a great many things. No one briefed me on the particular quality of time that happens on post. It is not slow time the way boredom is slow. It is suspended time. You're not waiting for something to happen. You're performing duration itself. You're the physical proof that continuity exists, that the institution holds, that whoever needs to be reassured by the sight of a man standing still at a gate can look up and find him there. You stand. You breathe. You allow nothing in your face. What happens inside your face is, technically, your own business. The first week, I used that interior time to run drills in my head, recite procedures, review the week's briefings. It felt productive. appropriate. By the third week, I was using it to remember things. Small things first. The layout of my mother's kitchen. The name of the road we lived on before Coventry, when I was 5, and we were in Birmingham briefly. The exact sound of my best mate Kwame's laugh. The build of it, how it always started like he was reluctant, and then gave over completely. I was not sad. I want to keep saying that because it matters. I was not sad. I was cataloging, saving things I thought I might forget if I didn't run them through my hands regularly. I didn't understand yet that I was making a mistake. Build tension the thing about Buckingham Palace and the guard at large is that people have a script for you before you open your mouth. Before you take a step, you're not a person to them, not immediately. You are an image they've been building since childhood, since some picture book or documentary, or their first visit as a kid when their parents held them up to see the tall man in the big hat. You are a symbol before you are a man. Most days, this is simply the job. You accept it. A surgeon accepts that patients see the coat before the person. A priest accepts the collar. You are what you wear, and you understand that the uniform is doing work that has nothing to do with you specifically. But some days it gets inside you a little. There was a girl, 7, maybe 8, who stood in front of my post for 45 minutes one afternoon in my second spring there. Her parents were doing the tourist circuit, moving on, coming back, her mother periodically calling Isabel, come on now, come on, and Isabel not coming on because Isabel had decided something. She had decided to make me blink. She stood maybe 4 feet away and stared directly into my eyes with the complete confidence of a child who has not yet learned that sustained eye contact is a social act, not a test of will. She was wearing a yellow coat. She had a smudge of something, chocolate, I hope, on her left cheek. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, mimicking my posture, making herself into a tiny mirror. She stared for so long that the other tourists started watching her instead of me. There was a low, appreciative ripple. A few phones went up. I was aware of all of it through the peripheral discipline you develop. You know what's in your field without moving your eyes, and I was holding the line, feeling the particular vibration of professional stillness in my jaw. And then she sneezed. A catastrophic sneeze. Her whole body pitched forward. She caught herself, straightened, looked around to assess her dignity, found everyone watching, and went deep scarlet. She looked back at me, and I almost smiled. Not quite. The discipline caught it, tucked it back, smoothed the surface. My face stayed the wall. But inside something fired, briefly and brightly like a match in a drawer. I had the thought, she will tell this story for years. The time she almost got the guard. She nearly had him. And then the thought behind that thought, which took me longer to name, I will not tell this story to anyone. Not because I was forbidden, we're allowed to be human in the telling, not because of regulation. Because I had no one to tell it to. I had been in London 2 years, and I had colleagues, good men, relationships built on shared pressure and shared dark humor. I had my mother on the phone every Sunday. I had Kwame on text, though less and less. He got a girlfriend, and then a mortgage, and time does what time does. But the tell this story instinct, the thing you feel when something small and funny happens, and you want to relive it through someone else's reaction. I had no address for that anymore. No specific face I was saving it for. I filed it away, like I filed everything. Like I was building a library in a room I'd locked from the outside. The other thing that happens, that no one says plainly, the ceremony requires you to perform emotions you do not have while suppressing emotions you do. You're required to look solemn at functions where the circumstance doesn't move you. You're required to look neutral at events where something inside you is clawing at the walls. You stand at memorials and arrange your face in respect, and sometimes the respect is real, and sometimes it's a shape your face knows how to make, and after a while you stop being sure which is which. This is not unique to the guard. It is probably true of surgeons and judges and priests and any person who wears a professional face for long enough that the professional and the personal faces begin to press against each other, exchanging substance through the membrane. What was unique, or particular at least to my version of it, was how quickly I made peace with the exchange. How little I mourned the things I was trading away. My second year, We had a posting that involved a memorial service. A significant one, names being read. I stood post and listened to the reading for 4 hours, and after the first 20 minutes, I became aware that I had exited my own effect entirely. I was hearing the names. I was not receiving them. My face was performing the correct gravity. The feeling that should have been behind the face was delayed or redirected somewhere inside I couldn't immediately access. I thought, I'll feel it later. Later came. The feeling did not. I put it in the library. Locked room. Same as the girl in the yellow coat. Same as the color of the November sky that first morning. Same as everything. I want to be precise about this because the wrong reading of it would be that I was becoming cold. I was not becoming cold. I was becoming organized, sorted. I was building a system for managing the intake of experience because the job required me to continue regardless of what the experience was doing to me, and a system felt better than drowning. The system worked. For a long time, the system worked. The thing I didn't account for: systems don't care about the content of what they process. A system that manages grief will eventually process joy with the same efficiency. A muscle trained to restrain one thing will restrain everything. You don't get to build selective armor. It doesn't work like that. I understood this intellectually from watching my father. I did not understand it about myself until the day my mother called and told me she was getting remarried, and I said, "That's wonderful, Mom," in the same voice I used to confirm briefing times. She paused. The pause was short. She was a practical woman. She moved past it. But I heard it. The pause heard me. And I sat on the edge of my bunk after the call and tried to locate something: joy, worry, complication, anything, and found the library. Rows and rows of shelves. Everything boxed and labeled and filed. Nothing in my hands. I sat there for a while. The barracks was quiet. Someone was watching television 3 doors down, and the sound came through laughter track, distant like radio from another country. I didn't feel alarmed. That alarmed me. There's a way that certain people appear in your life at the exact wrong moment to be convenient. Right when the system is running smoothly. Right when the architecture you've built is load-bearing. When everything depends on the structure holding. That's when they walk into the frame, and they are somehow the specific frequency that makes the walls ring. Her name was Priya. She was a doctor. Not a romantic detail, just a fact, though it would matter later. She had been standing in the tourist cluster outside the palace gate for reasons that had nothing to do with tourism. The anniversary of my posting fell in mid-October, and October is when London decides to be beautiful in the particular furious way of something that knows it's temporary. Gold light through the trees in St. James's Park. The smell of something, leaves, exhaust, the Thames on a westerly, that is specifically London and no other city on earth. I had been back home to Coventry twice that year. Both times felt like visiting a foreign country where I spoke the language but couldn't remember the customs. My mother's new husband, a Ghanaian man named Bernard, steady and kind and frankly better suited to her than any version of my father had been, shook my hand at dinner and said very little, and I appreciated him for that. We sat in my mother's kitchen, which had been rearranged to accommodate Bernard's coffee machine and his particular opinions about where the good knife should live, and I looked at the space where the old table used to be and thought, I don't know how to want things to stay. Not resentment, understanding. Things change, and the wanting them to stay is the part that hurts you, not the change itself. I had filed at one early, room 3, shelf 6. Well organized. Kwame had stopped texting by March. Not a fight, not a falling out. Just the frequency had been declining for 2 years, and then there was nothing, and I noticed it the way you notice a sound that's been gone for a while. After the fact, from the shape of the quiet, I want to say I reached out. I didn't reach out. I told myself it was mutual, that we were both busy, that this is what happens. People orbit away from each other. It is natural and nobody's fault. The library accepted this without comment. Priya was standing to the left of the standard tourist, not because she was on a call. She had. I became aware of this through the peripheral field, the permanent scanning, a specific way of standing when she was upset. Weight forward, one hand moving at her side, even as the other held the phone, like she was needing something that wasn't there. She wasn't crying. She was the kind of person who, you could see it clearly, would remove herself from any space rather than cry in public. But she was close. The edges of her were fraying, and she was standing directly in my sight line. Now, the rule, the trained response, is neutral effect. You do not engage with civilians' personal dramas. You are not a social worker. You are not a priest in a confessional. You are a post. You stand. I stood. But I watched her the way you watch weather, not to do anything about it, just to know where it is. She finished the call. She stood there for a moment, phone in her hand, looking at something she wasn't seeing. Then she looked up directly at me, the way people sometimes do when they catch themselves staring at something that isn't going to look away, and her face did a complicated, very human thing. Half embarrassment, half something that wasn't embarrassment at all. She said, to the space between us rather than to my face, "Sorry. I'm aware that you're not a therapist." I said nothing. I was on post. She nodded, as if I'd spoken. "Right. Yes. Of course." She left. She came back the next day. Not to speak to me. She came with a friend, and they walked past, and she didn't look at me at all, which is paradoxically a kind of looking. I noted her the way the peripheral system notes everything. She came back again 4 days later. Alone. Late morning. She stood at a comfortable viewing distance and ate a sandwich. Not a tourist thing to do. It was a Tupperware container from home sandwich, a bring-your-own-lunch situation, and she read something on her phone while she ate. This happened 3 more times over 2 weeks. I did not interrogate this. The library does not interrogate incoming material. It files. But something in me was attending to her. Not romantically. Not yet. That's not what this is about. Something simpler. She kept coming back to stand in a public space and be visibly okay. And I kept standing in a public space and performing visible okay. And there's a grammar between those two things that I didn't have language for yet. Build tension. It was a Tuesday when the incident happened. A group of tourists, large, noisy, American, which is not a judgment, it's a description, had clustered near the gate during the changing. Someone in the group, a teenager, had the specific teenage energy of someone who has decided this is the moment his friends will find him funny. He got close, closer than he should have, started narrating loudly, doing an impression of what he imagined was a British accent, which was the accent of every Mockney film ever made. His friends laughed. He got closer. I knew what was coming. You develop an instinct for the trajectory of that energy, when it's performance for the crowd versus when it's going to arrive at the boundary. This was arriving at the boundary. He reached out, touched the tip of my bearskin with 2 fingers, grinning at his friends. Now, what happens in that moment is precisely calibrated. You have options, all of them practiced, all of them appropriate to scale. This was the lower end of the scale, not aggression, not threat, teenage stupidity with an audience, which is its own species. I turned my head. 1 degree. 2. Slow. Deliberate. I made eye contact with him. I said nothing. I have a voice I can use when I need it, the command voice, the voice that was trained into me and lives below the chest, but I didn't use it. I just looked at him. The laughter stopped. He stepped back. His friends stopped photographing. The crowd, which had been enjoying the spectacle, did the thing crowds do when the balance shifts. They became an audience for something different, something they hadn't paid for. The teenager nodded. No, he didn't nod. He did something between a nod and a recoil, the involuntary movement of someone who has miscalculated how much space they occupy in a situation. He backed away. The group moved on. A ripple through the remaining crowd. A few Americans behind them, older ones who'd seen the whole thing, started to applaud, which felt wildly disproportionate to me, but I accepted it as a species of relief response. And then I heard, from the middle distance, a very quiet, Priya. She was eating her Tupperware sandwich. She was watching me. She made a small, evaluative expression, the kind of expression that contains a conversation you're not having out loud. Then she went back to her phone. That evening, she was still there when my rotation ended. I don't know why she was still there. I didn't ask. The asking would come later, and the answer, I'd had a terrible day at the hospital, and I didn't want to go home yet, and somehow this was the most peaceful square mile in London to me. That answer would do something to my chest I wasn't prepared for. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was I was off post, out of uniform, in the civilian shell of myself that I wore home. Dark coat, no ceremony, just a man walking. And she was sitting on a bench reading, and I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. The library doesn't explain its operations. I said, "You come here a lot." She looked up. "No surprise," as if she'd known I was going to say something eventually. "So do you," she said, "though arguably you have more cause. You eating that?" I gestured at what appeared to be a second Tupperware container. It's a very aggressive question. It's a very prepared sandwich situation. She looked at the container. She looked at me. She said, "It's leftover Pollock Painter, and if you eat my Pollock Painter, I will report you to someone important." I sat down. She didn't move to make space, because she'd already left space. The space had been there. Climax, we talked for 40 minutes. It was, in retrospect, the longest I'd talked to anyone in, I don't know. I can't name the last conversation that felt like two people using words to actually move toward each other rather than manage each other from a distance. She was a junior doctor. Cardiology. She was in the middle of something at work. She didn't explain, and I didn't ask, which she later told me she appreciated, because most people immediately need you to justify your upset before they'll sit with it. She just said, "It's been a difficult month," and I said yes without asking why, and the yes carried more than yes usually carries. She asked what it was like, the standing, the hours, the stillness. Most people ask this with a baseline assumption. They want to hear that it's boring or impressive or strange. They want to place it in a known category. She asked like a doctor asks, like she was gathering information to understand system, not to confirm an expectation. I said, "You build a very clean interior." She tilted her head. "Clean. Organized. You learn to." I stopped. "Tried again. There's no room for clutter. So you file everything away. You get very tidy. And the things you file away, they stay filed." She was quiet for a moment. The park made park sounds around us. Pigeons, a child somewhere, the city's undercurrent of traffic that Londoners stop hearing within 2 weeks of arriving. "I do that," she said. "Not with recognition exactly. With the tone of someone identifying something they've been doing without naming it." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "How do you know that?" "You come here," I said, "to stand near something that's holding still. When you're not." The silence after that was not uncomfortable. It had weight, but weight isn't always uncomfortable. Sometimes weight is just density, significance, the feeling of something being actually true. She said, "That's a very presumptuous diagnosis. You ate 2 Tupperware containers of leftovers on a park bench for 11 consecutive days. I'm a professional observer. You counted. I'm on post for 8 hours. The accounting happens automatically." She laughed. It was a short laugh, startled out of her rather than offered. The kind that means something landed where it was actually aimed. I sat there and felt the laugh go through me like a struck bell. And then the bell rang the second note, the one underneath, the one I've been not hearing for 3 years. I have not had this. I have not had a person I was talking to rather than talking at or being talked at. I have not had this, and I have been filing around the absence so tidily that I had almost filed the absence itself. Almost. The thing I did not do was name this as loss. Not then. Not to her. Not in the moment. I sat on the bench and felt the bell ringing and let the park sounds continue around it. And when she asked if I wanted the last of the Pollock Painter, there was a third container she'd been holding out on me. I said yes, and she passed it over, and we sat in the unremarkable late October light and ate leftover spinach and cheese and said very little else. I did not name it as loss. I named it very quietly as retrieved. Something I'd put on a shelf, brought back down. Resolution, I went home that night, and I called my mother. Not Sunday, not the scheduled call. A Tuesday, 9 in the evening, just a call. She picked up on the second ring. Did not ask why I was calling. Because she was my mother, and my mother was practical, and practical people understand that an unscheduled call is not a problem. It is a person reaching for something they need. "Danny," she said. Just that. My name, the way she says it, which is with the emphasis in the wrong place by everyone else's rules and the right place by every rule that matters. Mom, I said. How's Bernard? Bernard is watching a terrible program about antiques, and he is very happy. A pause. How are you? I started. Stopped. The library offered several options. Fine. Good. Well. All accurate in the technical sense. All the correct filing of the question. I said, I think I've been very quiet, Mom. I think I've been very quiet for a while, and I'm not sure all of it was the job. Another pause. Longer. Not worried. She was not a worrying woman. Not externally, but present. Actually present. Your father, she said, was very quiet for 30 years. You know what he told me once, near the end, when he was trying to explain it? What? He said, I kept meaning to set things down. I just forgot to pick them back up. I sat on the edge of my bunk. The barracks was quiet. Someone was watching television again, 3 doors down. The laughter track distant. I heard it differently now. I don't want to forget to pick things back up, I said. Then don't, she said. Practically. Completely. 6 months later, I found the photograph of my father. Not in the box. The box was in a storage unit in Coventry, and I hadn't opened it. I found the photograph on my mother's bookshelf, in a silver frame that hadn't been there before. Bernard must have helped her put it out. The fireplace photograph. My father laughing at something off frame. I stood in front of it for a long time, and this time looking at him, 20 years younger, laughing that open, unguarded laugh. I didn't think, I don't know this man. I thought, I almost was this man. And I thought, there's still time in March. I took the first leave I'd use voluntarily in 2 years. 10 days. I had 34 days accumulated because I always found a reason. The roster's thin. We have the ceremony in April. There's a posting review coming. Always a clean professional reason to defer the leave, to demonstrate that I was available, dependable, continuous. There's a word for this. Kwame. Kwame, who I'd stopped talking to, used to call it disappearing while standing still. He'd say it about other people. He'd probably say it about me now if we were talking. I texted him. Just, mate. I've been a ghost. I'm sorry. You around? I put the phone down and went to bed and woke up the next morning to, I knew you weren't dead because your mom would have called me. Welcome back from wherever. Pub when? 6 words, and I could hear his voice in every one of them, the exact frequency of him, the way he always made generosity sound like mild inconvenience because expressing warmth directly made him uncomfortable. We are similar in more ways than I had let myself remember. Saturday, I typed. Obviously Saturday, he replied. Don't be weird about it. Priya, this is the part I've been circling around. She is not the resolution. I want to say that plainly before I say anything else, because stories about men who discover their emotional damage through a woman have a grammar I distrust. The woman who fixed him, the woman who opened him up, the woman who is therefore instrumental rather than actual. Priya is actual. Whatever she is to me now, she's a whole person, and the story of my forgetting is mine, not hers to solve. But she is the frequency that made the walls ring. We met for coffee in November, again in December, and once in January when she texted me unprompted at 8 in the morning. I'm having the worst Tuesday, and I need someone who won't try to fix it. Are you free? And I rearranged 2 things I could rearrange and said yes, and we sat in a cafe in Pimlico for 2 hours, and she talked, and I listened in the actual way, the full attention way, the way I had been practicing on post all those years without knowing what I was practicing it for. And she asked me once about the filing system. I describe it again, try to explain it more clearly, what it feels like from the inside, the library, the locked room. She said, do you know what that sounds like clinically? No. Dissociation lite. The functional kind. The kind that gets called discipline instead of what it is. And what is it? She considered. She's careful with words. I've come to understand that about her. She doesn't give them until she trusts them. Protection, she said. It's protection, which is the right thing when protection is what you need. And the wrong thing when it becomes the only thing you know how to do. I sat with that for a long time. We both did. The cafe made cafe sounds. Someone's child at the next table was systematically destroying a croissant. My father, I said. He had it. The same thing. I watched it my whole life, and I understood it as discipline. sacrifice, the job requiring something of him and him giving it. And now I think he forgot there was a difference. She nodded slowly. Between the duty and the forgetting. Between choosing to set something down and forgetting it was ever in your hands. There is a moment. I'm going to try to describe it accurately because I think it's important. There's a moment that happens when you've been running a system for so long that the system becomes transparent to you. You can't see it anymore because you're looking through it. The glass is the water. And then something changes the angle of the light. For me, the change happened not dramatically. No single rupture. It was accumulated. The girl in the yellow coat I wanted to tell someone about. My mother's pause on the phone when I said that's wonderful in the wrong voice. Kwame's silence, which was partly mine. My father's photograph. Laughing in front of fireplace, looking like someone who still knew how to be surprised. And Priya, sitting on a bench eating her second container of leftovers, asking how the standing felt, and actually waiting for the real answer. Each of these things on its own filed. In the library. Shelved. Together. Accumulated. They kept the room from staying locked. Climax the posting that broke something open. I want to be careful about what I call this. It didn't break me. It broke the glass. April, the following year. A significant state event. We had been briefed thoroughly, hours of it, every contingency, every protocol. I was in dress uniform and standing in one of those positions where you're seen by a great many people, and most of what you're doing is being seen, performing institutional continuity for people who need to look up and find it there. There was a moment. Mid-ceremony. The music. There is always music, specifically chosen, specific weight. Moved into something I hadn't heard before. Or hadn't heard with my ears open. It was a lament. Old. The kind of melody that doesn't resolve the way Western music resolves, that keeps the ache inside the notes rather than releasing it. And I felt it. I felt the music. Not performed feeling. Not arranged feeling. Actual feeling arriving from underneath like water through stone, the kind you can't file because it's already past the filing, already inside. I stood at attention. Face forward. Hands at sides. All of it correct. Every external thing. My eyes were wet. Not crying. I did not cry. But the eyes were wet, and there's a difference between those two states that matters and that I'd spent 3 years blurring. I made myself unable to distinguish between the performance of stability and the actual thing, and what I was feeling in that moment was both simultaneously. I was holding my post with every trained fiber, and something in me was also breaking open with equal authenticity, and neither canceled the other. They were both true. I stood there in the April cold and let them both be true. When the ceremony ended, the slow procedures of ending, the movement of officials, the dispersal of crowd, my officer passed behind me and said quietly and without breaking stride, "All right, Sergeant?" I said, "Yes, sir." And for the first time in years, that answer was both things at once. Resolution to leave. Coventry. My mother's kitchen, rearranged to Bernard's specifications, smelling of something on the stove. Bernard was at work. My mother sat across from me and did not ask how I was. She put tea in front of me and sat down and just was there, present. The kind of company that doesn't require you to perform your state of mind. I opened a box. The storage unit key was on my mother's keychain where it had always been, and we drove over together, and I found it by memory, the box my father had left to no one specifically, the box of his non-talking life, the evidence. There were letters in there, from his own service, from mates I'd never heard him mention. Letters that were not what I expected, full of observation, full of small reported things. The sky here looks like the motorway does in February. Remember that specific gray. Saw a kid today doing something your nephew would have done, made me laugh for about 5 minutes. This man, my father, who came home and stopped speaking in narrative, had once told stories about everything, had once been the kind of person who saved small moments to give to someone else. He'd had the same muscle I had. He just trained it so hard for so long that he couldn't switch it off when he came home, or didn't know how, or I didn't know that the switching off was allowed, that the duty didn't follow you into the kitchen. I sat in that storage unit, and read his letters for an hour. My mother didn't say anything. She sat in the dusty plastic chair she'd brought in and drank her tea and let me read. When I was done, I said, "He was funny. In these. He was funny. He was," she said. Before. Before what specifically? Before he decided the uniform and the man were the same thing. I looked at her. "He wasn't the uniform," she said. Simply, "You're not the uniform. You're the man inside it. The uniform is just a job. A very important job. But still." I went back to London. Back to the barracks. Back to the posting. I stand at the gate, and I let it be two things now. The discipline and the person behind it. The filing system and the things worth not filing. The stillness of the post and the interior life that runs behind it, which is mine, which I have stopped treating as something to be managed out of existence. I'm not always good at this. Old habits have mass. Some mornings I feel the glass sliding back, the system trying to smooth everything flat again. On those mornings, I have small strategies. I text Kwame something stupid and wait for him to say something stupider back. I call my mother not on Sunday, or not only on Sunday. I have coffee with Priya on the Tuesdays that are terrible, and we sit in the Pimlico Cafe, and the child at the next table destroys a croissant, and I listen the actual way. And sometimes on post, when something small and funny happens, when a pigeon lands on a tourist hat, or a child does something spectacular and ridiculous in the name of making the guard blink, I let it register. I file it, yes, but not in the locked room. In the room where I can find it. In the room I can walk back into and say, "Here, this was a day. This was a thing that happened. This was a reason." The photograph my mother framed. The fireplace, my father, the open laugh. It's on my shelf now. She gave me a copy before I drove back. I look at it sometimes, and I think he got the filing wrong. He filed the duty under the person, and eventually couldn't find where the person had been shelved. He came home and didn't know how to unperform the stillness, and so the stillness became the whole of him, and the man who wrote The Sky Looks Like the Motorway in February became a man who stood at the edges of photographs like a post, positioned slightly behind everyone else, trained out of taking up space. I think if someone had sat on a bench with him and asked how the standing felt and actually waited for the real answer, I think there was still a man in there who could have answered. I think it's not too late for me. I know it's not too late for me. That's not optimism. Optimism is filed in the room with everything else. This is just observation. Clinical. The way Priya gathers information to understand a system. The system can change. The system is already changing. Ending the thing about standing still for long enough is this. You think you're holding your position. What you're actually doing is letting the world decide where to flow around you. Duty is not the same as disappearing. Discipline is not the same as forgetting. The man inside the uniform is not a liability. He is not noise to be managed or softness to be trained out. He is the reason the uniform means anything at all. My father didn't know that. I almost didn't know it. Now I stand at the gate, and the tourists come with their photographs and their expectations and their small, extraordinary children, and I let myself be both things at once, the post and the person, the stillness and the current behind it. And sometimes the light comes through the trees in St. James's Park in that particular October way, gold and temporary and furious, and something in my chest rings like a bell that somebody struck, and I let it ring.